friends, Bethany Bravery here. Welcome back to another episode of the Bringing Her Hope podcast. I am so excited for you to meet my new friend, Cari Kates. Carrie, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I the very shortened version is I was raised by a single mom, and my parents divorced when I was young, and we moved around a lot, and that was actually great preparation for my career, which ended up being in radio. And if you know anyone in radio or media, you tend to go where the job is, which means relocation most of the time.
Yeah.
And so I've lived in about 15 states. I changed school every year until high school, pretty much. So I'm great at making new friends because you have to be.
Yes.
And I got to see a great example of a really strong woman who taught me to, that to take care of myself. And I don't like to say it in a, you don't need a man, because I believe that we need each other, but I also learned how to be independent and take care of myself because I saw her do that. So I was very career focused for a long time. And then very surprisingly in 2018, maybe 20, I can't even remember now. I think it was 2018, met a guy in my field, and fell in love and got married. And now we both do the same. We're both radio people and doing life, and we're newlyweds.
I love it. So awesome. So today we're going to be unpacking this topic of praying for your future husband, what that looks like. So Carrie, that's the journey that God has taken you through. So why don't you we'll pack our bags. Let's go on this journey together.
Okay. Yeah. So, like I said, I grew up with a single mom, and, I didn't really ever have an example of marriage. My mom never remarried. She died in 2016. So once she left my dad, she didn't really date a lot and was focused on taking care of us, and then never remarried. So marriage was something I desired and, looked up to, but I didn't really have an example to try to follow, So I was very focused on my career. So through high school and college, I didn't really date a lot, like my mom didn't. But also, honestly, it was pretty hard to slow me down. And I was just on the go all the time, loved to have fun, and was really passionate about my career and having a cool job. And so I really chased that. And through that, I got to the age where probably somewhere in my 30s, where I feel like a lot of my friends went, well, you kind of, they said it in a much nicer way, but like, well, you've kind of passed your prime. Most people get married in their 20s, or now I feel like a lot more people are waiting until their 30s. But, here I was, like, with no potential on the horizon. Wasn't really, online dating wasn't even a thing yet. But then once it did become a thing, I wasn't really all that interested in it. I have no issue with it. I have plenty of friends who have found lifelong partners through online dating, but it just wasn't my thing necessarily. I did it once or twice because a friend made me, and didn't take it seriously enough probably, and didn't enjoy it. So I really had just kind of gotten to a place in my life, and I would say I felt this way throughout, of, Lord, it's just me and you, and that's okay. Like, I want you to be enough. Help me see you as enough. But that may be my calling in life. I may be called to singleness, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So that's a hard place to get to, especially if you desire, like, especially if you're a romantic, but if you desire to be a spouse and have a spouse, that's a hard place to come to. But I had really gotten to that pretty content place. For women, kids are a lot of a part of the equation. And I just didn't, I didn't necessarily desire to have kids at the time. So I was like, I'm okay with this. But then there's always that thing in the back of your mind that's like, but it'd be awesome if somebody came into my life, And as I entered into my 40s, that what I wanted for the rest of my life became very real. And I was like, you know what? I do want to be married
Mm.
and I would like to have a family. And that's, the older I get, the different, that more different that's going to look for me, or the possibilities, I should say. So I did really start to have a desire that I believe God birthed in me
Mm.
to be married, but it still wasn't my one thing that I was going to go after. I was still focused on
Uh-huh.
my career.
Yeah.
So I still got to be myself through the process. Like I still focused on my career, had a lot of fun at my job, but was very much more open to, it'd be cool if you would connect me with someone, Lord.
Mm.
So I tried to be more open just in my engagement with other people on the subject, because I just tended to, like, I had really great guy friends who would say, Carrie, you just don't seem interested. And I was like, what do you
Mm.
mean? And they would say, like, I've always known that I'm just your friend. Which I would usually joke with them and go, well, you are, I'm not attracted to you. Sorry, bro.
Reality
But
check. Oh gosh.
yeah, I mean, you're great, but
Yeah.
um, but it just was good wisdom for me, for them to go, so it's cool that we have that relationship, but any guy you meet sees you
Mm.
as not, like, you come off as not interested. And I
Mm.
was like, oh, okay, well, help me. So guy friends in my life were really good. I was like, well, help me know how to maybe change that or be better about it. Um, so there was definitely some personal growth there. Counseling is a big part of my story. Well, that was a goal for me when I turned 30, that I wanted to start counseling, because I think mental health is a part of overall wellness. And so digging into childhood issues, insecurities that I didn't even know were there, that helped a ton to just help mature me and help get me ready to be in relationship
Mm.
with another person. Um, but again, keeping God number one. Like, I'm not losing that. I don't want to lose that. So like 2017, I think 2018, somewhere around there, I was hanging out with my roommate, who was a decade younger than me, but just great, and a great person. So we loved to spend time together. And she brought a friend along, and this friend was super fun girl, like career girl too, but she was had just gotten engaged and had been dating her boyfriend for a decent amount of time, just gotten engaged and was about to get married. Very attractive, fun personality, like one of those girls that you're like, she's super cool, I want to be like her. And like, maybe she'll let me be friends with her,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
got to know her a little better, and I was real interested in this story of, well, how did you guys connect?
Mm.
What brought you to this place? Because she had a story of broken relationships, and this guy was finally what she had prayed for.
Mm.
And she said, well, I wanted to be married, and so I prayed every day,
Mm.
and I just set it out as a goal, and I prayed every day for my husband, and here we are. Well, I couldn't connect with that's my goal in life, because
Mm.
again, I wanted to have a cool job. I had fun in my job. That was really my focus. But I did connect with, like, something pinged me where I was like, I can connect with the idea of, if I need to seek the Lord on this on a regular basis,
Mhm.
and put more emotional effort and energy into it if I do desire to be married someday. And I was like, you know what do I have to lose? Like, praying regularly can't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
So I've never once met anyone that went, I just wish I hadn't have prayed so much, because I'd
So
be
true.
healthier for it.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, it can't hurt anything. So I put a calendar. I didn't tell anybody I was doing it.
Mm.
I put a calendar, or an alarm on my phone that would go off every night at 8:30. And I had it, like, I put like secret language on it, so that if I was with a friend and they saw it go off, they wouldn't know that it was time for me to pray for my future husband.
Mhm.
But I took it seriously, and I started praying. And at first it felt weird, because I'm praying for nothing. It's like, there's no guys I'm interested in. Everybody I work with is married or weird. I went to a church with a bunch of couples. I, like, anyone single was 20 years younger than me. And so I was in a place in my life where at 40 something, there aren't a lot of, there's not a lot of options. And
Right.
or they can look very different. So I didn't know exactly what I was praying for, but I knew I needed to pray. And so I would just pray in general, like, Lord, I'm praying for my future husband, that you would guide him. Would you lead him to me? Would you be with him today? Would you grow him as a man so that he can lead me well?
Mm.
Um, would you help him to know you? The things that I wanted. I When I was younger and people would say, what are you looking for in a man? I had like a full list of like super hot, really smart,
Yes.
super fun, this whole list.
Yeah.
Well, the older I got, the list got shorter and shorter to where I went, I'm just looking for someone over 18. And friends would go, don't you want a Christian? I'm like, no, that went off the list at 35. I just want someone over 18, which of course I didn't mean, but
Right. Right.
um, so I really was in a place where I was like, I just want what God wants for me. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not going to try to dictate what job he has, what he looks like, what his history is. I just want who God wants for me. And so I
Mm.
really prayed in that direction of, Lord, whoever that person is that you have for me, be with him now, shape him now, and help me meet him, and I
Mhm.
did it every day. And there were some days where the alarm would go off and I'd look at it and go, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. And then I'd carry on, because I knew that God knew my heart and what
Yeah.
I was praying for. And he and I had visited it enough that he knew the details. So I did that for, gosh, a good number of months. And then in my professional life, I was, involved in radio. This radio station that I had worked for, I was still really close to the leadership there, and the guy in charge was hiring a radio person, and I know a lot of people in the radio field, and so he came to me and said, "Hey, I'm hiring for this position. Would you help me? Like, would you put the word out about the position? Would you help me think through who might be a good possibility?" And just kind of like be an ear for me when I need to talk through ideas and on who to hire and stuff. And I said, absolutely. I love radio. And so I'll do whatever I can to help. And so as that process went on, a friend of mine in the industry, so he's a colleague. So one of my radio bros had reached out to me and let me know that he applied for the position and wanted insight from me because he knew I'd worked at the place. So he's like, hey, give me the lowdown, good, bad, ugly. Do you think I'm a good fit for this? All that. So I'm just talking to this radio guy and trying to help him figure out this job situation. And then, I knew that he had applied, but the boss hiring didn't know that I knew that he had applied. It was just like the strange where I'm in the middle, not telling either one of them that they're talking to me. I'm like the
Right.
secret keeper in the middle.
Right.
But through this process, I just got to know this radio guy better, where his name's Matt.
Mhm.
Where I just learned more of his passion behind the job and connected with him on some of those things and got really interested in him as a solution to this, like the person to take over this job, because I was so connected to this radio station and I wanted them to have the best person too. And I just started to see like, man, he really would be great for this.
Mhm.
So through that process, the boss, I hope this is all making sense the way I'm
It's
describing it.
making sense, girl. You're doing good.
The boss comes to me and says, hey, I'm thinking about hiring this guy, Matt. What do you think of him? And so I was able to go, well, I've actually gotten to know him pretty well. I still never told either one. I was still the secret keeper in the middle, but I was able to give him a more whole picture of Matt as a
Mhm.
candidate and said, I've actually gotten to know him pretty well. And I think he's really smart. I think he would do a great job. And, said, these are the reasons why. Here's where I think he might be weak for the job and he may need some more support or training or whatever. But ultimately, like, I think he'd be great. So the boss says, okay, I think I'm going to hire him. And I was like, cool, thumbs up, and then that's it. I don't go tell Matt because again, I'm the secret keeper in the middle.
Yeah.
I just watch how it plays out. And so so ends up that the boss hires Matt. Matt moves to the city I live in where this radio station is. And I'm the only person in town he knows. Like
Mm.
he's moving to a new job and um, he didn't know anybody else. So he would call me and say, hey, do you want to go get dinner? I'm he's here by himself, and I want him to feel welcome to this new
Yeah.
place. I'm
Yeah.
excited for him to start his new job. Can't wait to tell him about, what he's going to love, what's going to be a challenge, all that kind of thing. And so we would just hang out.
Mhm.
And the more we hung out, the more we talked about things outside of just the radio and talked about our personal lives. And the more I got to know about him, the more I liked him. And I went, wow, he's just a solid person. Like, he's a great man. He's a good man. And I, learned through it that his number one was the same as my number one. He wanted
Mhm.
to serve God first, but then he was very passionate about radio like I was. So like, his job mattered a lot to him too. And so we really connected on that too, which I've never been married before this. So I don't know what that's like in other marriages, but I can imagine if my spouse didn't understand my job, like
Mhm.
the ins and outs of my jobs, that might be more of a challenge, or maybe just wouldn't feel as connected. But I felt very connected to him on this level that was so important to me, because he shared the interests that I did in it and was very serious about it like I was too. So eventually, it comes down to that awkward, he asks me to, hey, do you want to go get dinner? And I said, sure. And he says, would Thursday night at 6 work? I'll pick you up. And I was like, what? I think
That's
this is a
different.
date. I think it's a date. So we went through that, and we both stumbled through it because I'm older, having never been
Mhm.
married. He's older, and had been married for a long time
Mhm.
previously. So like, we're both kind of stumbling through it.
Yeah.
So I learned pretty quickly, all of the visions that you have about how things are supposed to go, like, just throw
Mhm.
it out the window. It just
Yes.
doesn't matter. And
Yeah.
whatever you're picturing in your mind of what he's going to be like or look like, just throw it out the window,
Mhm.
because he's nothing like what I imagined or pictured. One, because when I started praying, I didn't imagine anything. I just was
Mm.
like praying for a faceless person, a
Yeah.
formless person. As I still kept that prayer alarm every day, and I was engaging, Matt and I were talking about this job opportunity, I began praying for him. Not and I wasn't necessarily connecting the two. I would go, okay, it's time for me to pray for my husband, my future husband. And I go, and you know what? I'm going to pray for my friend Matt, because
No way.
he's trying to get this job, and I'm going to pray for this radio station because I want them to hire the right person. And so I just kind of started doing it at the same time. And then one day I felt like the Lord was kind of going, hey, you can stop putting a divider between these things, because you
Whoa.
are praying for your future husband.
Whoa.
But then I felt crazy, because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. I could never tell anyone that. I sound like the crazy female who's like, I knew you were my husband before you knew. But that's really what God had begun doing in my heart. So, and through all this, we're hanging out. He's becoming more and more interesting to me on a personal level. So, yeah, we started that awkward, what I thought was a first date was, and we dated fairly quietly for a good bit of time before any of our friends knew,
Mhm.
because because we're in the same industry and
Yeah.
it's very small, we needed to see if it was a thing before people knew.
Mhm.
Because we just wanted to honor one another, and we wanted to honor God through the process. And we're like, you know what? We're going to try this out. But if it turns out to not be a thing, then we're going to high five one another and cheer
Mhm.
each other on in our careers. But, let's not, but nobody else needs to know.
Yeah.
Um, so that was just such a rewarding time. And dating in your 40s, when I hadn't dated a lot. I mean, I dated some, but just not a ton, because again, I was much more interested in my career. Um, that was really different, because he's older and I was older. A lot of the silly stuff that you're kind of consumed with just wasn't even there. Like, we really pretty quickly went to like, well, what do you like? I'll never forget, right after we started dating, he asked me, hey, what do you want to do when you retire?
Mm.
Like that. if he asked me that 10 years ago, I'd go, I don't know. That's so many years away. Well, I'm in my 40s thinking about what do I want to do when I retire?
Yeah.
And I said, I don't want to tell you. And he said, why not? And I go, because you're going to think I'm a nerd.
Mm.
And he said, well, what is it? And I go, I want to work at a radio station. Like I'd like to maybe own a radio station, and just throw everything into that. Maybe it's a tiny little radio station that doesn't even reach a lot of people, but just get to own it and love it. And that's what I want to do. And I felt like that would be nerdy because that's the job I have now is in radio. And it would be like, that's not a real answer because you're, retired. And I said, what do you want to do when you retire? And he goes, I actually want to own a radio station. I was like, what? So like stuff like that, I felt like the Lord was like, see, this is your person. So yeah, we dated for, my friends make fun of me because I couldn't tell you the exact date that we started dating. I couldn't tell you like when our first date was because I just wasn't keeping track.
Yeah.
But we dated for probably a year, maybe a little bit more, and then got engaged. And true to form, I was at a radio conference, and he flew in and surprised me and proposed to me there. And we got married 3 months later. And that was almost 2 years ago. So we're still in that really fun newlywed time. But I was just telling him yesterday, I spent so much time as a single female, and I always would call myself a single girl because I didn't feel like a woman, because I was just still so fun and fancy free and excited about my job. But I spent so much time as a single female that and had become so independent that I really saw that as a great, meaningful life. And I truly believe it is. God calls some people to singlehood. And I think that's an honor. I'm someone who believes that's Paul in the Bible.
Yep.
And look at the impact he made with his life on earth and look at the impact that's happening through scripture. So I believe in that. And I really thought that's my calling. That's for me. And I'm going to be okay with it. Well, that tells me that because I got to the point where I was content and okay with it, it wasn't necessarily my calling. It wasn't the time for that season. But I never knew how, during that time, I never knew how much being married would add to my life and make me a richer person and really help me thrive. I feel more like myself than I ever have because I have a husband who builds me up and helps me see where I'm talented and gifted and smart and funny, and helps me see where it's like, maybe don't, like where I'm not. But he believes in me. He loves me, and I feel it. I see it. And I think that comes from that he loves God first, and he sees me through God's eyes, and he knows how much value I hold to God. And so then I'm that valuable to him. And he really shows me that. And he would tell you that, he had years of getting it wrong and making mistakes, and this is his chance to do it right. And I'm like, well, hey, I'm thankful for your story because it got us here. And I get to have you as a husband, and you're such an incredible man. And yeah, I tell everyone, if I knew marriage was this fun, I would have done it a long time ago. Because it's just so great. But I know that's not everybody's story. And truth be told, I wasn't ready. When I was in that single season of like, okay, this is what it's going to be, I wasn't ready to be married. I hadn't done enough personal growth. I hadn't grown spiritually enough. I wasn't to a place where God was enough yet. And I believe I needed to be there. So it's kind of like, I think of the story in the Bible where Abraham lays his son Isaac on the altar. It's in that willingness. Abraham doesn't know that God's going to rescue him from that moment, but it's in that willingness to go, I'm going to follow you. I don't get it. And this makes absolutely no sense to me. And is the most painful thing ever, but I'm going to follow you. And in that instant, he sees the solution of the ram in the thicket. So it's like that willingness to hand it over to truly surrender, that God's like, okay, that's not actually the answer I have for you. I just needed you to get there first. I needed you to
Mm.
be willing. And I really saw that come to fruition in my life and my story in meeting my husband.
Oh, that is so good. Carrie, let's talk to the gals who are maybe in their 30s or in their 40s, and every Thanksgiving, every Christmas that they go to, everyone's asking the question, are you seeing someone? Are you dating someone? Just that pressure of, once you get to kind of that age group, how do you handle the pressure? What do you do with that? How do you respond with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It can be so frustrating because in your seat, it may be like, don't they know if I met
Mhm.
someone, I'd be telling them, like, why do they have to keep asking me? But they're interested in your life.
Yeah.
So the way I handled it was I was honest, and I would say, yeah, no. But I would honestly say, but I'm not really, seeking that out right now. Like, because some people go, this drove me crazy. They'd go, well, have you tried online dating?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're not the holder of the solution necessarily,
Mhm.
like, and there was a time where it's like, yeah, actually I did. But again, in fairness, I never really did it, and didn't take it all that seriously. I believe now that's because God was holding off so that I could meet my husband. Um, but like, I would just be honest and say, I haven't, I'm not dating anyone, but I'm not really trying. It's not something that I've put as like a primary goal in my life. Or if you're a place where that is your goal, I would be honest and say, I'm not dating anyone, but I'm really open. I do feel like God has me in a place where I'm ready for relationships. So, hey, if you know anyone you think I should meet, I'm open. I would not be afraid of setups at all. I have so many friends who have met their spouses through being set up. And keep in mind that if you have a mutual friend, they know both of you and love both of you probably, and may see that you would go well together.
Yeah.
And it's never bad. I had a friend tell me this, I think it was really wise words. It's never bad to get some practice in.
Good.
Now, saying that, you should never, ever, ever do it at the expense of someone else's future or what God's calling them to. But it's really okay to go out with someone and go, they're great. I don't think we need to continue this. You should always be honest and not waste people's time. But there's nothing wrong with getting to know people and getting some practice in that. If nothing else, it can make you a better friend to people. But I think honesty and just being authentic in where you are in that journey is the best way to deal with that pressure, because it could turn into someone going, well, hey, let me walk with you in that. Let me pray for you, or let me
Yeah.
introduce you to someone, or let me make sure that I always invite you over for a holiday that you might be alone if that's something you desire.
I love that. You seem to live a pretty full single life. You were immersing yourself in a career, you had community. But did you ever experience, nights or, just observing other couples where there was loneliness? And if that loneliness came up, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, great question. I would say I think that was less frequent for me than a lot of my girlfriends who were single also. They would talk about this kind of pining after marriage,
Mhm.
or like an angst to be a mother. And I just couldn't connect with that. That just wasn't me.
Yeah.
But I did reach a point when I would say I was in my probably mid 30s where I went, no, I think I do want to have a family. I do want to be married. And that was really the first time that I experienced loneliness.
Mm.
And then into my early 40s, I would say there were definitely nights where I would get in my bed and think, is this what it's going to be like forever?
Yeah.
And I would think about my mom who never remarried
Mm.
and go, am I going to be alone for the rest of my life? Who's going to be around my bedside when I die?
Mm.
I thought about that stuff. And I would like to say that I was better at this, of praying in those moments and asking God to help me see him as enough. But there were times that I remembered that and went, Lord, if it's me and you, I'm okay with it.
Mm.
Help me be okay with it. But a lot of times it was just kind of okay, this may be what it is, and I got to figure that out.
Mhm.
I've got to be okay with that, because I still want to have a fulfilling life. But one thing that I tried not to do was for that loneliness or any kind of emptiness that I felt around other couples or um, when I was alone, I tried to never, ever, ever let it prohibit me from living life.
That is so good.
I wanted to live the life that the season I was in that God had me in and
Mhm.
really experience life. And because of that, I came into a marriage later in my life where I've lived a really full life. And so I'm not saying to him, I gave up all these dreams for you because I didn't. I lived them out. Like I've traveled, I've done all these things and I've just tried to have a lot of experiences and meet a lot of people and try to grow from relationships, friends and coworkers and mentors and even dating so that once I am in this marriage, got to being married, I didn't have those regrets. So I think it's really important to not let that loneliness paralyze you to where you can't move on. You still got to live life. And it's in the living of your life that you may meet the person that you're
Yes.
supposed to marry. I mean, that's what happened to me is I was busy living my life. Um, and I had a friend of mine actually said something to me that it was just really wise words. They stood out to me when she said them, and they have stuck with me ever since because they are true.
Mm.
She is someone who I think she's probably in her late 40s. She might be over 50 now, um, but she's been married. I think this is her second marriage, if I'm not mistaken. And I think her first marriage was very difficult and not super healthy, but so her and I were chatting, and I was in my mid 30s and wasn't all that interested in marriage. But I think she was someone who had said, "Hey, are you dating anyone? Do you want to be married?" And so I was going, well, here's where I am on that. And I remember her saying to me, in your single life, anytime you feel lonely,
Mm.
don't ever let that loneliness dictate action. Like, don't go seeking someone because you feel lonely, because the loneliness is very temporary. And
Yes.
she said to me, the second that you meet the right person, all of the years of loneliness that you feel, all the moments of loneliness that feel heavy because they add up to so much and they can feel really dark and heavy at times, they all go away in an instant when
Mm.
you meet the person that you're going to marry.
Mhm.
And she was so right. The second that I met my husband, not the second I met my husband, the second I knew that this is the person God had for me and I was looking at my future, I couldn't even remember the lonely moments because I was so fulfilled because he had so much to my life.
Mm.
And that was just really important wisdom she didn't even know she was giving me at the time, but it has stuck with me ever since.
That's good. Um, in one hand, I feel like you had this open-handed posture of, if I need to be single the rest of my life and you've called me that to that, Lord, I will. But in another hand, you still gave the Lord your dreams. So as you got into this rhythm of starting to pray for your future husband, how did you kind of keep both hands in check? You know what I'm saying? How did you keep the balance between, Lord, this is really what I desire, but at the same time, it's your will. I want what's best. I want your plan. How did you do that?
Yeah, that it's a constant surrender.
Mm.
It's not something like we don't surrender once and then we're done. I think we surrender to the gift of Jesus's redemption on the cross once, it's one time that you say, I believe that is true and I accept it for my life. But every other surrender in life after that is constant. It's a regular
Mhm.
surrender, um, regularly surrendering to God's will, regularly surrendering to God's call on my life. And and so it's that very much was a some days I was great at the balance, other days it was very unbalanced.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say I don't know that I intentionally handled it super well one way, but it really is about keeping that posture of I ultimately want what God wants for my life,
Yeah.
whatever that is,
Yeah.
and really being okay with that.
Hmm. I love that. What do you think, that season of singleness, if it felt even longer than what you had originally, hoped for as maybe a teen girl or whatever that looked like, what do you think walking through that season has taught you for marriage or prepared you for marriage?
Wow, I'm so thankful. It was such a gift, such a
Mm.
gift. The words of my married friends kind of pop up for me at times where I go, huh, that's why they said that, of like, hey, once you're married, it's not just you, you're thinking about somebody else. So, like that is like, oh, that's true. Um, which I love. I love including my husband in everything. So that's still super fun for me. Um, but it really was, so it prepared me in learning how to take care of myself
Mm.
so that I felt like a whole person by myself.
Yeah.
So I learned how to take care of myself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I learned the importance of being connected to people, of relationships, friends, family, coworkers, even. I learned the importance of those relationships as a single person,
Mm.
so that now that I'm married, I'm able to still practice engaging in that with my lifelong, the person I'll be with for the rest of my life. But I also have those relationships as support when it's
Mm.
needed.
Yeah.
If he and I are going through any kind of challenge, I'm able to engage those relationships to say, hey, we need prayer, or we're trying to make a decision. Would you walk with us through this? But then I'm also able to support them,
Mm.
because of the support of my husband. Um, but I think the biggest lesson is just I got to learn who I was,
Yeah.
and I'm really thankful for having so many years to be able to do that. Choosing to go to counseling was a big part of that. Is that I just was proactive about, I want to see pitfalls before I get there.
Mm.
I
So
want to heal my heart, what may be broken now, before my husband has to feel the effect of me not dealing with stuff.
yeah.
So during my single years, counseling was really critical to work through stuff from childhood and my relationship with my dad. Because remember, my parents were divorced when I was really young. So there were certain things with my dad that I really needed to process through, and even things with my mom that I needed to
Mm.
process through. And being single afforded me that opportunity so that by the time that I'm married, I'm able to be the best version of myself because I've worked on it and I've tried.
Yeah.
And that was part of the gift of that time, is really getting to work on myself.
Mm, so good. You mentioned earlier in the interview that, even as you were thinking about dating, you still had this concept in your head that Jesus was going to be your first love, that he was going to come first no matter what. And I think sometimes we as women, like we watch the Disney princess movies as little girls, and it's the prince that feels like he's the savior in our story. But sometimes that hierarchy can get out of whack. And I know for me personally, I've walked through divorce, but in my single mom life, it's been that has to be first. And I think too, sometimes when we go into a marriage and we have that much pressure on someone that they have to be our all in all, that they have to be our everything, when Jesus is supposed to be, it can actually be crushing in a relationship. So if you could speak to someone who's like, Carrie, I hear you, and I want to pray for this, but I can't stop thinking about it, and it's consuming my life because I want this so desperately, what would you sweetly say to her?
So I would be very honest in saying it's hard for me to connect with that because I just didn't feel the same
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
But I would also like, if I'm your friend, I'm going to ask you, why do you want it so much? Like,
Mm.
why is it such a thing for you?
Mm.
And maybe really try to unpack that of, is it because you feel like you're not whole until you have that
Mm.
relationship? Because it, that's not true. You
Yeah.
are whole, and marriage is not going to make you whole.
Right.
All the things that we dream up that are going to go away once you get married, they don't. Like,
Right.
you walk in with the same stuff that you brought into the marriage, or you bring the same stuff you had, you bring it into the marriage too. So I would say, why is that such a thing? And
Mm.
really try to think through and pray through discovering that.
Mm.
And yeah, I just would never, I will never regret putting Jesus first.
Mm.
And it's not just, oh, it's so kind of me to do that. That's
Yeah.
really what he demands. If you follow Christ, he demands to be first in your life. He is Lord,
Yep.
even if we don't make him Lord of our life. But once you finally surrender to that and you agree to it, and you kind of give in, I promise that you will never regret it.
Yep.
You just won't. He fills in all the gaps.
Yep.
He helps make you, he doesn't just help, he makes you a whole person. But that starts with surrendering to it, believing in it,
Yeah.
agreeing to it. And I think that's really hard. Like what you're describing, that
Mhm.
feeling, I think that's probably the hardest thing. Um, and I don't know that anybody really like has the answer. Otherwise, there would be a lot more healthy relationships and marriages than people in life. Um, but yeah, I would just really encourage someone going through that to figure out the why. Why do you feel that way?
Mm.
And really try to surrender. And maybe it's as simple as praying. If you look at the Psalms and King David, how he prayed, he was very honest in his prayers.
Yep.
So try that approach with God and go, I don't get it.
So good.
You put this desire in me clearly and you're not delivering on it. And I like, here's where I am.
Yeah.
So I'm going to need you to get me through this. When Here's the thing though, is when you are honest to God, and now the example I'm thinking of is actually in the book of Job. When Job finally goes to God and is like, um, he finally is like, okay, what is the deal? Why did I lose everything? And maybe this is terrible after all, and starts kind of questioning his allegiance to like, I'll be okay. God answers with like, oh, did you put the stars in the sky?
Yes.
Oh, were you there at the creation of the
Yes.
world? So
Yep.
when you come to God raw and authentically, and you should,
Mm-hmm.
because let's be honest, he knows you, like you're not
Yep.
hiding anything.
Yep.
You got to be prepared for the answer.
Yep.
And the answer may not be a firm or a definite thing. The answer may be, were you there at the creation of the earth? Or look
Mm.
in the actual place in the Bible is lost to me right now, but when Paul, it's in the New Testament, Paul prays, I asked God to take this thorn from my flesh.
Yeah.
We don't know what the thorn is. It was
Yep.
something that was bothering him. But I asked God to remove the thorn 3 times. And the answer there isn't, okay, I'll remove it, or, well, it's coming later. The answer was, my grace is sufficient for you.
Amen. Amen.
And it's like, what kind of answer is that? Well, it's the right answer, is that
Yeah.
my grace is sufficient for you.
Yep.
So you really have to work to be okay. And I'm saying work because it's not natural. It's not
Yeah.
natural to go, oh, cool. Yeah. You have to work to be okay with that answer
Yeah.
and to go, I don't get it, but I'm going to let your grace be sufficient for me. And I think that is birthed out of trusting
Mm.
God. Saying I trust you are the 3 most powerful words you can say to anyone. It's not I love you. It's easy to love things.
Mm.
Trusting people, things, trusting God, that's the hardest. So it's really working on that trust of God. Like, do you really trust that he's going to deliver?
Yep.
And for me, when I was praying and I had that alarm going off every night, I really did trust God to answer, but I didn't know what it would look like.
Yeah.
There were moments where I was like, it may not be a husband he's going to give me, but I know I'm praying for something.
Yeah.
And I trusted for God to bring that to fruition however he saw fit, because I knew what he wanted for my life is what was best. And that's what I wanted to.
That's so good. I think one thing that you mentioned too that is so important is when we come to the Lord, being authentic and real and wrestling with Him with the things that we struggle with, because He does already know our thoughts. I think that creates deeper intimacy with Him. If we don't feel like
Yes.
we have to come with these, Christianese type prayer requests or whatever, it's like He already knows our thoughts. And in fact, His thoughts and ways are so much higher than ours. And so, the more that we can get to know each other in the secret place or spending time with him, the more we're going to start to see his character. But then, in addition to that,
Yes.
we're going to get to see who he calls us to be. And then we're operating out of this confidence of, okay, Lord, I trust you because you have proven yourself time and time again. You have been faithful and you have a purpose and a plan, and his timing is perfect. Like for you, he wasn't late, it was just on time. But
Yes.
we don't, sometimes we have to praise him before we see the outcome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. Well, Carrie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your story and being transparent with all of us. How can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram and Facebook, and they are both private. So
Okay.
you'll if you but I would love to chat if you want to, if I can encourage you or pray for you, like please do reach out. My Instagram is the Cari Kates. It's TheCarikates, and my Facebook is just Cari Kates. So and it should allow you to send messages. But yeah,
Perfect. Well, thank you again for your time. Thank you again for just sharing your story. And I just know that it's going to bring hope to so many women. So thanks, friend.
thank you.
Absolutely.